On this episode of Sensational, I'm joined by Anne-Marie Harrison, Education Director from Ideas Afresh, for an episode exploring PDA. We discuss what it is.
Often people will describe the child as being panicked by being asked to do something.
It's not driven by behaviour, it's driven very much by the anxiety and something else that's happening in the brain.
It's that complete panic attack.
What defines a demand?
A demand is an expectation. It's a social expectation. It can be as hidden as a glance, the look that sometimes people refer to. You know, we're working with children who are very good at picking up on detail.
And ideas for supporting children with demand avoidance.
In a practical way, I've had great success with little choice sticks. So a little bag with some lollipop sticks with choices written on them. So the child then can pull out for themselves what they would like to do. So we're offering choices, but in a very non-directive sort of way.
So let's get started. Welcome, Anne-Marie. It's really nice to see you. I'm going to start off with what hopefully is a simple question. I imagine it might be a bit more of a complex answer, but can you tell us what is PDA?
A young lady told me recently that her PDA is a profile that makes her experience the world with extreme. So everything feels extreme for her, and that she's on constant red alert. And I think that is quite a nice summary of the fact that we've got this term pathological demand avoidance, which again is one of those terms that, you know, our whole society is trying to alter the way that we refer to things. And there's been a lot of work in the last 5 years on research, and extreme demand avoidance is one of the sort of phrases and terms that is being more commonly used, or even demand avoidant. And I think it's important that we don't consider this profile as a choice thing. It's very much rooted in anxiety. And as that lovely young lady mentioned, it's rooted in that extreme red alert that you seem to be functioning on. But of course, that's changeable, and with the right support and the right input, there's lots of evidence and lots of research and my own experience that actually that profile, that red alertness can be altered and can be supported.
Brilliant. So when we're thinking about that state of red alert, we're thinking about PDA. What does that look like in our children and young people?
So often people will describe the child as being panicked by being asked to do something, reluctant to participate even in something that families know their child will enjoy. So I think, you know, a word that parents often use when I'm working with them is baffling, and that often will say their little person's baffling. And even in families where PDA is associated with the autism profile, and not exclusively for autistic children, but commonly that's where the research has been around that profile sort of ebbing into that autism diagnosis as well. And so those families often will say, you know, we've read on about autism, we're using the autism-friendly strategies, and we're approaching this with the autism-friendly ways of working, but that's not helping. And that's quite common, because some of the autism-friendly ways of working historically would be very directive, and that's the worst way that we can support these children.
Okay. So if we think about an environment that is a little bit directive and it is quite structured and there is a lot of demand, we think about school. So should we be recognising PDA in school, or what would that look like in a school environment?
I think the easy answer to that question is we could almost rephrase that to, should we be recognising individual children's profiles and needs in school per se? And the answer is resoundingly
absolutely yes.
Yes, absolutely yes. And I think what we need to change is not just recognition, but adaptation and accommodation. And I think this is where perhaps still our system has still got a long way to go. We need to be thinking about how we can reframe and restructure the provision that we have once we've recognised these differences in our children's profile.
Yeah.
But I think for PDA, it's particularly important that it's recognised, because something as simple as the register could be enough to send a child completely off kilter for the rest of the day.
Yeah. So we've had a little bit of a chat about PDA, what it might look like and where the stumbling blocks might be throughout the day. But as a diagnosis in this country, where are we? What does that look like?
It's a really good question, because there isn't any clarity.
No,
and in the last 5 years, there's been a lot more research, and some of which actually in Edge Hill College here in Liverpool. And the research is definitely leaning in towards recognising that this is a profile for many young children, many adults, many people who have that anxiety-driven or anxiety-rooted way of decoding and coping with the world. And that actually that often that is coming alongside some other diagnostic term. And so the PDA Society have done a lot of research around whether we should be recognising PDA as a diagnosis. And personally, my personal experience would be that I think it would be helpful in many ways, but I also worry that we are becoming so defined by labels that we then only start to see part of that child. And if we only see the anxiety, then we're in danger of missing all the other potentials that surround that child's development. So I think diagnostically, some authorities, some settings recognise that as a diagnosis. We've got the EDA 8, which is the extreme demand avoidant 8 questionnaire that a lady, Alison Onions, I think is her name, developed sort of 2021 time as a research profile paper, not as a diagnostic paper, but it has been used and it is available on the PDA website if anyone wanted to have a look at that, because it's quite a nice way. It's just 8 questions that are kind of defining really that PDA profile in terms of a questioning, a curious approach.
Yeah.
And I think that's the important thing, curiosity around why we're seeing this sort of presentation from the children that we are.
I think particularly because I can see why people would use that word baffling or frustrating or confusing, because we do see it, like you said, in activities and experiences that the young people like and enjoy and want to do and are motivated to do, but we still see that freeze, those anxiety behaviours and that word, that avoidance of doing it, even when it's something that they like. So I suppose having a framework at the very least, a paper at the very least, to understand where some of this behaviour might be coming from, I would imagine would be useful. But what we're saying is not necessarily a diagnosis per se standalone at the moment.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you know, it depends on society, doesn't it, as to whether we need that in order to acknowledge it. And sometimes I think in our society, we need a diagnosis and a diagnostic label in order to acknowledge it, in order for families to access the support that they absolutely warrant. And I think you're right. I think the confusion and the baffling side of things when a child who you know loves swimming and then suddenly they're refusing to go swimming, or they're refusing to go to the park when they've loved the park in the past. And sometimes it's about the transition, it's about the emotional connectivity that happens when they're asked if they want to do that. And their default position is a panic. And so then the panic is, let's avoid it. Let's not take that risk. And it's not a decision. It's not a clarity kind of like, oh, I'm not going to risk that. It's just something that's happening sort of internally with the interospective sort of profile. So it's an involuntary response. It's not that our children are choosing to be belligerent or awkward or avoiding.
Yeah. I think when I saw it most acutely in my own family was a time when my sister-in-law we don't see her very often, came to visit the children and wanted to buy one of them a swimming cap because she was really getting into swimming, super long hair, which was very thick like my own. And we were struggling to get a swimming cap. So let's go to Decathlon and choose a swimming cap. And we knew the purpose of the shopping trip. But when we got into the shop, faced with the range of swimming caps, faced with two smiling adults, which one would you like? And it ended up behind the clothing rail. Absolutely, don't come near me, panic, sensory overwhelm, and a real challenging shopping trip. And I remember my sister-in-law being so hurt and upset by that because she was driven to do something really nice because she doesn't see the children very often. She knew this was something that my child was going to like. And it ended in disaster still. It ended up in a really tricky situation. And then it's really hard to try and explain.
It is.
It's not driven by behaviour. It's driven very much by the anxiety and something else that's happening in the brain.
It's that complete panic attack, isn't it? Of like decision making. And we can all relate to that. We've all had moments, when we perhaps come home and someone says, what do you want to drink? And you can't even make that decision. And so we can relate to those feelings of being overwhelmed when faced with a question, but coupled with the question of what swimming cap would you like is also the social intensity and the expectation. And that's, sometimes PDA masks that sort of question, which is the panic, but actually sometimes that's masked by an expectation rather than a direct question. Yeah.
And I think definitely that's what happened in that situation. So it's really important to kind of get a better understanding of that. Thank you so much. Before we move on to our parent question, I'd just like to ask anybody listening or watching today to like and subscribe to our channel so that we can continue to grow our audience and have these really important conversations. So our parent question today, is it damaging to force a child into school when they are refusing?
Oh, I'm nearly having a panic attack. Actually, I'm going to share a story with you to answer that question. So not that many years ago, I know I'm long in the tooth and I've been long in this profession, but actually within the last 5 years, and I don't want to be more specific than that because of confidentiality, but within the last 5 years, a parent was advised by someone far more qualified and far more high up the professional ladder than myself to wrap their child in a blanket, get them in the car, and once they get to school, school will deal with them. Now, that said child then became what we kind of see in social media as a school refuser, which I hate the term, but that's not for now. So that child was not then able to attend school for 2 years. And after 2 years and working lots and lots with the family, we managed to get this little girl back into school by using a Dora Explorer rucksack and some footprints for her to follow into school. Now, was that damaging to try and force a child into school? The answer is for any child, if we force them into a point of emotional distress, then even if we physically, as that professional had suggested, got them physically into school, the reality is we can do more harm than good once they're there. And it's so important that we move away from the concepts of, well, once they're here, they're okay, that actually we need to support that transition. We need to make our children robust. They need to be ready for that step of being in one place to another place, and driving them through emotional distress is not a positive way of dealing with that transitional despair, which is what we're experiencing. We're experiencing transitional despair. And so if we can support that by using strategies that are child-friendly, that give them a more emotionally robust start to their day, then that's where we need to be.
Because also we know, don't we, another term that is kind of growing, people are having a bit more awareness of it, a bit more understanding, is this term about masking. And we do have that idea that's sometimes offered back to us, particularly as a parent of children with additional educational needs, is they're fine once they're here. But you know that they may be masking, they may be covering up that anxiety, they may be not showing externally that distress.
Absolutely.
Because they're trying to fit in, they're trying to conform and what have you, and that can be very tricky. So it's a difficult balance when somebody turns around and says to you, well, they're okay when they're here. Because also we know that might not always be true.
It is. And also that often children are fine. I mean, I started out my career at age 18 as a nursery nurse. I've been that person that said, don't worry, once they're here, they're fine.
Yeah.
And to parents out there listening, let me reassure you, often they are.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to suggest is that we avoid that emotionally distressed start to the day.
Yeah.
Because like everyone, our little people get over their distress, like many of us get over our distress. But what I'm suggesting is that actually, especially for our autistic children, our ADHD, our neurodiverse children, and today our PDA children, starting out with that level of distress will then take a long period of time for them to come to a state of being learning ready.
Yeah. And then I think just additional to that, what I'm saying is for the professionals who are then supporting that young person, have those extra special glasses on where you're looking really honestly and earnestly about, is this young person okay? And if not, what do we do to put in place?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Brilliant.
Being proactive in detecting whether that come down is taking longer than it would or should be.
Yeah. I'm very much aware that we've talked about PDA and we've talked about demand avoidance and we've talked about anxiety, and we haven't really thought about what a demand is and what a demand can look like in the day. So can you define to us what a demand looks like?
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important question, Laura, because people tend to think of a demand as asking a child to do something. But actually, a demand can be as simple. And I had experience of this many years ago where a 3-year-old little boy just didn't want a birthday, didn't want to blow his candles out because just lighting the cake was a demand to blow the candles out, and that brings with it that social attention. And he was recently turned 10 and he said he'll have a birthday, which is the first time he's given permission for a birthday, but he's not going to have a cake because he still finds that social intensity a demand. So a demand is an expectation. It's a social expectation. It can be as hidden as a glance, the look that sometimes people refer to. We're working with children who are very good at picking up on detail. And yet sometimes we forget the fact that actually they are the ones that will notice the raised eyebrow or the tightened jaw across the room. And all of those things are perceived and received by our PDA children as a demand. They're hidden. And so it's sometimes, I think we would be better almost changing the word demand to expectation, because I think expectation is a bit more revealing. There's an expectation to answer to the register when the teacher calls your name. But actually, if that's done in a much more friendly, light-hearted and less intense manner, then that alone can be enough to help a child start their day more positively. So, perhaps having name tokens that they post rather than, having to answer out loud to that question, because that's a demand. So even making a choice is a demand.
And when you think about it in those terms, you think about how our children and young people are almost being assailed all day by demands, choices, expectations, and how that can become so anxiety provoking. We see some of these behaviours that we might perceive as behaviours of challenge, but actually it's just a response to that anxiety because it's happening so frequently in the day.
Definitely. And just rephrasing things very gently. So if you're using a schedule, for example, which in itself can be demanding. So rather than saying, have you checked the schedule or remember your school bag, if we rephrase things to be far more declarative and we talk about things like, there's a schedule there that tells us what's happening, or it's really helpful if everyone brings a bag along. And so just gently rephrasing can make a huge difference to these children.
And I think you've just preempted what I was building up to my next question to be, is around, can you give us any ideas of how to present choices to children who've got PDA?
Yeah, I think in a practical way, I've had great success with little choice sticks. So a little, just a homemade little bag with some lollipop sticks with choices written on them. So the child then can pull out for themselves what they would like to do. So you can put sort of an amount of choices in. And I've recently, for the summer, made a sunshine with the points coming off that give some ideas of things that you might like to do. And that's just stuck up on the back door as a reminder of what's available to play with in the garden. So we're offering choices, but in a very non-directive, sort of telling sort of way. So, being, as I say, declaring those choices, putting those choices out there. So taking more of a market stall approach to what's available rather than a tick box or, a checklist kind of approach.
Super helpful. Yeah, that's a really lovely way of thinking about it, actually, that market stall. It's here.
Yeah, exactly.
Choose when you're ready. Come and access.
And not even giving that direction
No,
choosing when you're ready.
No, but I just mean, browse when you're ready and come
right.
in. Yeah.
Hear it, these things are here. Yeah. And for many of our children, it's exactly as you say, Laura, it's just having them out there so that our children almost happen upon. Yeah. So they're just there, but we're not directing our children. No. And I'm working with a school at the moment who are really kind of working hard to have activities out, but not say, these are the activities you can do if you want to. Yeah. So it's just that holding back. It's so alien to how we would ordinarily be communicating that it's just getting into the habit of holding back. Yeah.
So that leads on nicely to thinking about when a child has some success with some of these strategies that we're talking about and is able to make those choices in a less pressured way, a less anxiety-provoking way, and they are functioning, they're successful, they're doing really well. Our instincts are then to go and offer praise. Yeah. But I'm wondering, is praise something that might be difficult for a child with a PDA profile, and how do we manage that?
I think praise, anything that's direct, will be difficult for them to cope with in the moment. But that is not to say that we mustn't offer praise. Praise is so important for everyone's self-esteem, confidence, as we know. Yeah. And so it would be doing an injustice to these children to not give them elements of praise and, praise of many, many things, but again, doing that in a very declarative way. Oh, isn't it lovely when everyone's enjoying doing an activity? It's great. It warms my heart to see people enjoying doing an activity rather than being very direct. And also, families have had success using sticky notes on the fridge and writing, I loved it when, I noticed that. So again, being not directive, not necessarily using the child's name, but just being that kind of more broad way of offering praise in a gentle sort of way.
I wonder about deliberate overhearing. Yeah. You're having a conversation with another adult. That's lovely, isn't it? Oh, I had a lovely time in the garden with, and just so the child overhears that.
Exactly. That deliberate overhearing is just such a lovely way of doing that gentle reassurance and that gentle in the moment praise. Absolutely. Yeah.
We talk so much about PDA and we've covered quite a lot there, but I wonder, just to finish, if there's anything that you would particularly like to say about PDA, any myth that you'd like to bust, anything that you'd like to get out there just to finish our podcast today?
I think, as we started, really, that it's really important that we don't see our children as being awkward or refusing to do things, saying no, and that they're just being spoiled and being, don't want to do things, that they're choosing not to do things, is a complete myth. I think it's so important that our caregivers, our parents, our family members, our educators really do take on board that for these children, that anxiety that is rooted in the way in which they are trying to navigate the world it's reducing that, it's making their world comfortable, making it curious enough and exciting enough for them to want to be involved, for them to want to participate. That's really important, and not directing them, but just gently being with them alongside.
Oh, Anne-Marie, thank you so much for bringing your wealth of experience to the podcast today. And thank you to everybody at home for joining us today for this episode of Sensational.